First, I want to acknowledge the positive achievements of democratic socialism, two in particular. The first one is in actually creating democratic republics around the world. What was previously a feudal order, where very few people held the power and wealth, democratic socialists contributed to creating systems of government that were responsive to the people, and then extended voting rights to very ordinary citizens. So the democratization of politics was a true achievement that democratic socialists had a large hand in creating. Second, they actually improved life for people within their countries. I'm thinking in particular of social welfare programs like old age pensions, universal health care, minimum wage laws, legalizing unions, maximum hour laws, family allowances, unemployment insurance. All these types of things help make life better for people and were a true contribution to the amelioration of human suffering. On the other hand, there were in the history of democratic socialism and kind of highlighted some of the dilemmas that they faced that are still with us today and are worth pointing out. I'm going to focus on three of them. The first one is that there is a contradiction in this strategy from the start, which acknowledged the energy and the agency of working people in the early workers' movement, and the channeling of that into political activity dissipated some of that energy rather than creating a new society. Whereas you started out with workers in high engagement, high risk activities like, and these things were all illegal at the time, things like labor actions, strikes, takeovers of factories, forming unions and trying to force management to bargain with you. All these things were things that you had to get very engaged with and take some risks for, creating a sense of identification and ownership with the movement. And also you could see when you were successful, direct results in bettering your own life, as well as the lives of people that you were in association with. Now, when you move that toward a political direction, there could be high energy in creating political parties, especially when they were illegal. But once they got established, the role of working people became more and more relegated to that of voting to get people into office or to keep them in office. Now, voting, even engaging in election campaigns, is not that much of a high engagement, high risk activity. Doesn't create the same kind of sense of ownership as the previous types of actions did. And it tends to focus more on politics rather than on economic circumstances. And when you actually succeed in electing somebody, the benefits to your own life are rather indirect, so hard to see them. So that movement from direct action to political action had its costs. It also created another dilemma, which is that if you start out as a critic of the political economic system and see the need for fundamental change, once you accept a role of power within that system, you're going to have a lot of pressures to engage in reformism rather than fundamental change. Now, this happens because in order to get enough votes to get into office, you're going to have to extend beyond the people who are your die-hard supporters and true believers to people that put a greater premium on stability and order than on big change. So you got to reach out to voters who are not necessarily highly committed to your cause. And once in office, to get anything done, you got to build coalitions with other parties. That means that your position as a spokesperson for fundamental change is compromised, to say the least. You're not very credible when you're spending your time in office trying to make small reform changes. And it also changes your own perspective, I think, where you begin to get so focused on trying to make small changes and improvements in people's life that you start to accept that maybe it's possible that this will just make things good enough that big change is not going to be as necessary, or you can somehow gradually get to the point where the more fundamental change happens, looking toward it in some distant future, and the present things will get better and better. I think the tendency to think like that manifests when there's a major economic crisis, which a critic of a political economic system like capitalism would generally acknowledge. Those kind of crises tend to catch politicians by surprise, even democratic socialist politicians. I'm thinking in particular of the Great Depression, how that surprised people, and the financial crisis of the 1970s. Both of these caught folks off guard, who democratic socialists as well as other people who started to think that, well, this capitalist system could be gradually changed and made better and better, and kind of the big crises were behind us. We had fixed those things, which we hadn't, and I'm sure we still haven't. So the tendency is to move towards reformism and start to neglect the idea that there's fundamental change necessary. It also makes it hard for you to be a credible spokesperson for fundamental change when you're part of the system. Now, on the other hand, if you try to stay outside the system, there's a cost to that as well, which is that you're very vulnerable to repression, as we've seen over and over. In fact, this is demonstrated in the just post-World War I, when Democratic Socialist Party took power. In the interest of trying to create more social stability, they actually persecuted strikers and anarchists who were trying to move for more radical change through direct actions. They used the military to suppress strikes, which put them in a position that was very much against fundamental change, and also kind of betrayed their own origins. Finally, we have the problem that politics is organized within nation states, but it's dealing with problems of capitalism that are international in scope. This has been true from early on in capitalist history, where the imperative to continued growth and continued profit meant that they had to go beyond the borders of their own nation to seek labor and raw materials and markets in other places of the world. This is on steroids today. We have a hyper-globalized world, and that means that everything that we do on a national scale might conflict with what's best for the rest of the world. Now, let me try to make that a little more clear. You're expected as a politician in a national government to put the interest of your own people, your own nation first, and to kind of neglect when that's compromising what's happening to people in other parts of the world. You want to make sure you maintain our way of life here. That's what you're expected to do, and you'll lose political support if you don't, by saying we got to get off fossil fuels because people in other countries are experiencing drought and their islands are sinking into the ocean, or by saying that we have to create an international economic system that benefits other countries but may require sacrifices on our part. Those kind of things are not popular to say, and it's a dilemma for people in a national office, in a position within a national government, to make the case for that without losing a lot of support. So again, the pressure is on national focus rather than international. And also, the creation of international institutions for socialists is an imperative that's been always difficult to achieve. Capitalists seem to have been done this with relative ease to create international systems of finance, both the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II and now using organizations like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund to their advantage, where socialists have always become divided over how to do this. How do you create an international system that's fair to everybody when you're kind of embedded within a national political system? All right, so those are three dilemmas that democratic socialists have faced across history and are still facing today.